Okay, I think we should start. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us as we share some insights from the Community Digitalisation program with you. We look forward to having you on this call and appreciate the fact that you have decided to be part of this particular session. We know that digitalizing communities is not a one-man show. It's a combination of efforts from all of us. And we're hoping that through the insights that we will share today, you will then be able to join us in the efforts that we are trying to embark on in the pilot sites that we have for the Community Digitalization program. We have a packed agenda that will look at, we have opening remarks that will be provided by Mark Shriver. We then will go into sharing the actual insights from implementation, as well as reflections, because we've been doing this for a while now, that will be led by Karabo. Then we'll have a panel discussion where we will look at the role of financial service providers and regulators in driving community level digital payments adoption, but over and above that, financial services holistically, because our aim here is to make sure that people in those communities are fully financially included. Then we'll go on to wrap up and close the session. And we hope that you will learn as much as we will learn. Just some house rules. Key is that everyone is on mute except for the speakers. And we've done this because we've got a chat function where we will be able to engage with you via that chat function. So where you do have any questions, any comments that you would like to provide, please put them in the chat function. And we will be able to then respond as and when we can. If we're not able to, we will make sure that after the webinar, we do share any feedback that may be required that we have not provided during the session. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Mark to open the session for us. I just had the honors of welcoming you. My name is Lesego. Before I forget, I hope. My name is Lesego Mashego from FinMark Trust. I head up the South Africa Financial Inclusion Program for FinMark, and I've been given the honors to direct the program for today. I'm going to hand over to Mark. Before Mark joins me, let me just introduce who Mark is. So Mark Shriver is a senior financial sector specialist in the finance, competitiveness and innovation global practice of the World Bank, living in Johannesburg since 2023. He's been leading the financial sector development work program of the World Bank in South Africa since 2021. The work program covers three strategic pillars: strengthening financial stability and integrity, access to finance for vulnerable individuals and households, as well as micro, small, and medium enterprises, and mobilizing private capital to finance sustainable infrastructure. As part of this program, he is responsible for the Community Digitization program. Mark started working for the World Bank on financial sector development in 2013 and worked since then in several regions: Europe, Central Asia, South Asia, Africa, and Middle East. Between 2001 and 2013, he has been an on-site prudential supervisor at the Dutch, where he has also where he was also the founder and manager of the Supervisory Academy. Before 2001, he worked several years for a commercial bank in the Netherlands. Mark, over to you. Welcome. Please open the session for us.
Thank you, Lesego, and it's a pleasure to open and support you and the team, and welcome also on behalf of the World Bank everybody here in this webinar. We from the World Bank think that this is a very important initiative and also important partnership with FinMark Trust and all of you here, which I will speak about in a moment, and has the full support of the World Bank to make this a success. My opening remarks will be short. It will be about the what, why, and how of this program. And I think while this is work in progress, I will also reflect on the where to from my views. So what is this program about? So I see this as developing and implementing interventions to increase digital payments, and the team will speak about it in a moment. But there are several interventions being developed, and I mentioned a few. Awareness programs, financial and digital literacy programs. There is in community support, and there's promotion of existing digital payment solution. So that's the what of what are we doing here, but why are we doing this? And all those interventions are organized around increasing digital payments. And why is that important? Because we think that that's a stepping stone to financial inclusion. And financial inclusion, we think, is an important element of fostering economic livelihood, which is in the core of the townships in South Africa. At the moment, account ownership is high, so you could even say when you look at banks, 84% of the adults have an account, and if you look at non-banks including it, is even close to 98%. That is what our data is saying on the national level. But while account ownership is high, you see that account usage is very low, where 37% of the people are using their account as a mailbox. So how do we get from account? How do we get from a cash economy to a more digital economy supporting economic livelihood? I think that's in the core of this pilot. Then the how is this being set up? And I think the critical element of this program is that the program happens on the ground. It's feet on the ground through the community coordinators that are actually from the townships, know the people, and I think that's at the center of what the team is trying to do. And I think what is added to that is that the local experience and expertise that FinMark Trust brings is combined with some global experience from the World Bank technical team. But that's not all of it. I think it's very important that this program is building partnership with existing and new financial institutions. Because when you talk about digital payments, you talk actually about those instruments that come from financial institution. Is everything said by that? No. The building partnership with the private sector needs to go together with creating a feedback loop with the public sector, and I would say the policymakers and the regulators. So here, the National Treasury, the Reserve Bank, the Conduct Authority, and others play an important role in leveraging the learnings on the ground. So those are kind of the four levels of how this pilot is set up. The team will talk about the learnings in a moment. I had the privilege of learning ahead of time where we are in the program, and where to go from here. If I see what we learn now, we learn a lot. Are we there yet? Not yet. We're in the middle. We're in the middle of it, and those learnings need to come together in, and I would say, some kind of formula to, or maybe even better said, result in a scale-up plan where you say, hey, what we've done in Hammanskraal and Thembisa actually works, and we should also roll this out in other townships and increase digital payments. That would, for me, be a successful program. So what can we do from the learnings so far? I would say, if I look at it I would say that the first thing is that it would be important to apply a full set of interventions around specific use cases. I see that there are different interventions has been used in the different townships, but not per se organized around specific interventions. For instance, around there are initiatives with existing financial institutions, but I think the whole set of interventions can be applied, for instance, to a certain person to government payments around public utilities, of school fees. I think more leverage could be realized by looking at the whole supply chain in certain in the townships, or use organized community organizations like faith-based organizations, etc., to look at specific use cases and organize the different interventions around that. So that will be for me an important learning that we could leverage going forward. I think the second one I would say is to deepen the engagement with existing financial institutions. So there are partnerships I think that could be deepened, and also explore whether mandating or incentivizing either financial or non-financial. I think those are also things that we could explore to bring more of the existing financial institutions into the townships and be part of this pilot. And then the third and last point I would say is utilizing the feedback loop with the policymakers and the regulators. I think there are lots of learnings from this pilot around customer due diligence, especially around migrants. I think around interoperability, there's lots of learnings, and also how to get access of non-banks to the payment system. I think is also an important learning from this pilot, and that touches upon a broader set of interventions that the government is working on. The World Bank is also supporting, and let me mention a few. So, for instance, the National Treasury is working on a national financial inclusion strategy that can take a lot of those also regulatory interventions into considerations. But then the Reserve Bank is working on a payment ecosystem modernization program, allowing on one hand non-banks to enter the national payment system. There's lots of developments around PayInc and PayShap that can also be leveraged, I think, in this pilot. And then the Conduct Authority is going to work on the adaptation of the Conduct of Financial Institution bill that just has been passed by or approved, I must say, by Cabinet, and hopefully be tabled by Parliament soon. And that's important for building trust, a key foundation of financial inclusion. So this leveraging this feedback loop, I think is also something that we can deepen going forward. So let me conclude by thanking FinMark Trust first for their passion and commitment to making this pilot a success, but also the policymakers and regulators, National Treasury, Reserve Bank, and the Conduct Authority by supporting this actively and deepening the dialogue on the different areas. Of course, SECO is critical because they've provided the funding for this program, and without that this could not happen. But let me mostly thank the people of Hammanskraal and Thembisa for their trust in their program and participating, because without them there will be nothing. So rest me to say thank you, Lethejo, and everybody, please enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I like the fact that you started off by saying that we need to talk about the why, the how, and the where too. And I know some people are returning participants to the webinar, but there may be those that are new, and it's important for us to also tell you the original why, without the interventions, why we decided to do what we're doing. And the original why was particularly because FinMark Trust does FinScope surveys on an annual basis in South Africa. And as we analyzed the data, what we found, particularly among SASSA grant recipients was that they used their accounts as a mailbox. And this was a particular interest for us, and we wanted to understand why is that the case. And we embarked on a study together with the UNCDF, SASSA, DSD, National Treasury to try and understand this bigger why amongst grant recipients particularly. And in understanding the bigger why, we found a lot of things about grant recipients, but one of them was that they reside in communities where digital payments are not an in thing. I'm going to call it an in thing, or not something that they are familiar with. And we thought if government is investing so much money in grant recipients, and the money that is invested in this particular target group does not necessarily achieve or raise returns in the communities where they reside, what should we do? And this is how the project was conceptualized, actually, from a grant recipient study, but understanding that grant recipients don't live in isolation. They reside in communities that have enterprises, that have businesses, that have other community members, be it low income, middle income, that reside in those communities. And it was important for us to look at the program from a community perspective with the intention that we start unpacking the why, the how, the way to that Mark referred to. Thank you, Mark, for the opening remarks. Mark is our partner. We started off with a lot of research when we started with the program, trying to understand why people in Thembisa and Hammanskraal do what they do with regards to digital payments. We had a series of research work that happened in those communities. We learned quite a lot. Some of it was not even data that was collected from the communities, but rather some of the things that the community members would say to us to say, why you bring a stranger to do the research? Couldn't you find someone in the community? And that's how we learned that we're going to have to engage from a community level, and we're going to have to bring in expertise from the communities because they do exist in those communities. Without further ado, I'm going to then hand over to Karabo. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to hand over to Karabo to then take us through the insights from implementation. But before I do that, let me introduce Karabo for those who do not know who Karabo is. Karabo is a financial inclusion specialist at FinMark Trust. She leads the Community Digitalisation project to support digital ecosystems in South Africa's low-income communities with a focus on digital payments. Formerly a policy analyst at the Prudential Authority, Karabo brings experience in policy analysis, fintech regulation, and financial sector development. Karabo holds a Master of Laws in International Trade and Investment from the University of Pretoria and is passionate about leveraging financial technology to drive financial inclusion. Karabo, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lesego. Good morning, everyone. So 2025 was a year of implementation indeed, with lots of insights, lots of lessons, and lots of let's go back to the drawing board moments. But before we get to that, let's look at the project at a glance. So as Lesego has stated, the objective of the project and where we started from, I'll just remind everyone that this is a multi-year program that is aimed at assessing the feasibility of improving the livelihoods of community members in peri-urban as well as rural areas. This is done through establishing a sustainable digital financial ecosystem using digital payments as an entry point. It's a holistic and community-centered approach combining ecosystem assessments, targeted intervention, as well as continuous monitoring across consumers, enterprises, as well as financial services. As Lesego has mentioned, there are 2 pilot sites, being Thembisa as well as Hammanskraal, but we are not piloting in the entire township. We are looking at 3 economic nodes in Thembisa and 2 in Hammanskraal. So far, we have onboarded 355 participants. We have early childhood development. We have scholar transport that are willing to partner with us and learn with us through this project. Through the research that Leseho has mentioned, we have identified 6 priority interventions, and we will be going through them. But before that, let's take a look at Thembisa and Hammanskraal. This is an overview of the pilot sites. So you will see a contrast between the two of them, as it is the case with most of South Africans. Townships, Thembisa has 550K residents and 65 subsections. The mode of transport that is mostly used in Thembisa is taxis as well as trains, and the economic nodes that we are looking at are Okmore, Main Lane, as well as Rabasoto. In Hammanskraal, we have slightly lower residents, but 123,000 residents in Hammanskraal, same modes of transport, taxis and buses, and it connects 4 provinces, being Northwest Limpopo, Mpumalanga, as well as Gauteng. And there we are looking at Mandela and Thembisa as the economic nodes for the pilot. So the research showed some barriers to adoption, right? And we have divided those into consumers as well as enterprises. For consumers, we have noted that there are negative perceptions of formal financial services. People are mostly concerned about high banking fees, fraud, identity theft, as well as phishing. There is a restricted store value functions. Few cash out options are available, and where those are available, there is a surcharge of about 10% for each transaction. There is a low trust in mobile network operators. People don't trust that the network will be sustainable or will be strong enough to complete a transaction. There are limited merchant acceptance of digital payments. Some businesses simply just refuse digital payments entirely. Cards are discouraged for lower value transactions. You go buy a cold drink at their tuck shop, you cannot swipe anything less than 50 rands. And of course, the surcharges that are being imposed. Looking at technical as well as operational issues, there are frequent PIN failures, system down, and other reliability problems that undermine consumer confidence. What came out strong also in the research was the knowledge gap as well as the awareness gaps. Many consumers are not familiar with the digital payment solutions that are available and the benefits of using these digital financial services. For enterprises, you will see similar themes emerge, such as weak in-community FSP support, operational as well as trust issues, low awareness and understanding. But what is unique to enterprises is the limited use of bank accounts. This could be because of the burdensome documentation, stringent account opening rules, perception of high maintenance costs, as well as know your customer challenges that are faced, particularly by migrant business owners. The enterprises at these pilot sites have perceptions that the cost of POS device, of owning a POS device and maintaining one are high. There are also transaction fees that mostly do not understand, alongside concerns of adoption that increases tax exposure. So when you talk to them about digital payments, they'll be like, oh, the salesman will see what I'm doing or how much I'm earning. So those are some of the barriers that limit enterprises to adopt digital payments. So as we have mentioned, the research gave birth to these 6 priority interventions. We're going to go through the lessons learned from implementing some of these interventions. Starting with financial and digital literacy, the aim there was to address the knowledge barriers by enhancing the financial and digital literacy of community members to address some of the gaps that we have noted in the research. What we have done a needs assessment. So we got a service provider who went to the communities, started doing the needs assessment to determine how the curriculum must be tailored and the flow of the curricula. And to that extent, we came up with a tailored financial and digital literacy curriculum. The mode of delivery for this training was classroom as well as online. So far, we have trained 1,200 people in both pilot sites, 253 enterprises as well. And what worked in these training sessions was the practical demonstration of digital financial services. So we have observed a couple of lessons there. Firstly, that when you deploy such intervention, participants become more accepting of digital financial services. And this exposure to digital literacy helped address the fear as well as the misconceptions that others had concerning digital payments. So the practical demonstration generated strong engagements than classroom learning alone, and this is something that you will see that the CLOs or the community liaison officers continue in their day-to-day. But the key lesson under the financial and digital literacy was that digital as well as financial literacy is it's not a one-time solution. Continuous learning coupled with practical application and also ongoing support is very essential to building confidence as well as sustained adoption of digital financial services. Moving on to the awareness. So the objective of the awareness is to increase the trust and build acceptance of the value of digital payments in pilot sites. We also got a service provider here who deployed a 3-month campaign to raise the program's profile to shift perception of digital payments and to strengthen trust in them through the always-on awareness method. This is where we are targeting the community on radio stations, on social media, as well as community cashless markets. This is where 10 participants of the project, 10 enterprises from each pilot site came together to host or to plan these cashless markets. They came with their products, their services, and the payment of the day was strictly digital. And this was to showcase that it is possible to have a cashless market, to have a cashless society. And there were some lessons that came from those community cashless markets as well that we have noted down. But one achievement that I would like to highlight is that through Facebook, we have reached over 1 million impressions, 16,000 interactions that lasted longer than 3 minutes, over 1,200 followers that were gained. These are organic numbers, sorry, and the community combined reach of over 28,000. At the cashless market, we recorded 39 digital transactions, some EFT, some card transactions, some PayShap. Some of those enterprises as well as consumers were doing PayShap for the first time in these digital markets. So it was a learning curve for both enterprises, consumers, as well as ourselves in terms of project implementation. Some of the lessons that we learned when we were deploying the awareness intervention was that trusted local leaders are the primary influencers of participation. You will gather the interest of community members much more quicker, more painless when you go through a community leader, be it a church leader, a ward councillor, but having the support of those local leaders as they spread the message of either a cashless market or tuning to a radio station or training. Those are where these leaders can be plugged. Social media does reinforce campaign messaging effectively, but however, it lacks, or rather, the impact it peaks when it's deployed across multiple platforms and as part of a structured all-community campaign involving in-person events. And the lesson for community events that we learned was that it requires extensive as well as well-coordinated marketing and early involvement of the community in activities such as planning and execution. Awareness is most effective when it's locally relevant, consistent, and delivered through trusted community networks. We will now look at, this is a quote from one of the participants, Sehola Mola. She runs Haungaluli Daycare Center in Hammanskraal. She says that information must be shared at community meetings, events, and also on local radio. We should teach people, young and old, how to use the phones that they already carry in their pockets. We can move on to the promotion of existing solutions. Here, what we are trying to do is to promote digital payment offerings and drive adoption with the aim of establishing digital payments as the preferred method of transacting within the pilot sites. We cannot do this intervention alone. This is financial service provider heavy. So to that extent, we have engaged with the South African Association for Payment Providers, Banking Association South Africa, FinTech Association South Africa, to lobby their members to participate in the program. So once the training as well as the awareness interventions were deployed, we started seeing organic movement of FSPs who carried out independent campaigns and engaged the markets in Hammanskraal and Thembisa, building on the already high momentum that was generated by those interventions that I've mentioned. We were able to measure gains in terms of acceptance of digital payments. The rate of the POS acquisition in these pilot sites is particularly within the onboarded participants recorded an increase. What we have observed in terms of these interventions, or what we have learned rather, is that where communities are open to adopting digital payments, FSPs can really achieve significant progress through focused marketing and outreach efforts. So these interventions do not work in isolations. They provide links, and if all of those are successfully implemented, then we will really start recording great gains in terms of digital payments. Another lesson is that the combined impact of awareness campaigns as well as the community engagement activities generated that momentum in terms of acceptance as well as willingness to transact digitally. The key lessons to be learned here is that community interventions such as literacy as well as awareness have laid the foundation for adoption. The next phase really requires FSPs to leverage these activities by expanding access, strengthening customer support, and driving sustained use of digital financial services. Another intervention that we wanted to plug into the community that will enhance the trust when they are transacting digitally is in community support. Because of the lack of FSP footprint that was noted in the research, we thought this will be another intervention that could close that gap. The objective of this intervention is that community-based points of interactions for query resolution and building trust in digital payment solutions. So this is where we plug our community liaison offices. We have partnered with the NFO, the phase ombuds, to provide training for community liaison officers in terms of query escalation, query management, and the likes. We have the CLOs in their communities. They have interacted with an average of 180 consumers as well as MSMEs on a monthly basis. That's on an average, a monthly average. From those interactions, we've seen 40 support-related as well as 15 digital payment queries from those interactions on a monthly basis. So these numbers is what we record on average, where people need assistance in terms of the double payment, the double transactions that we deducted from their accounts. That will be a digital payments query. The support-related queries: how do I use my app? How do I send someone money? How do I do a pay shop? So those are some of the support-related. For MSME, support really looks like onboarding a POS device owner, as well as letting them know the functionalities of those POS devices. And this is one of the key lessons that we have observed, that beyond just device deployment, continuous training and support is essential to ensure that MSMEs can fully utilize the available functionality and realize the benefits of digital payments. Such an example will be the offering of value-added services. Some of the participants, the merchants, do not know what their POS can do. They don't know that you can pay bills on a POS device. You can sell airtime, and that could be another money-making avenue. Another insight that we have is that implementation highlighted that many consumers require additional support to confidently use banking apps and for everyday transactions, including sending money. This is where you would see that awareness as well as literacy is an ongoing thing, because this is the service that our CLOs provide. Initially, when we plugged the CLOs in the communities, we were thinking that they will be dealing with digital payments queries only, but now we are seeing that there are some support-related issues that emerge from their presence being there, the trust is being built, the community members understand that there are avenues that they can reach out to if there are issues. So we are trying to build trust in the financial services using this intervention. The key lesson here is building digital confidence is just as important as expanding digital access, ensuring consumers can use digital financial services independently and with confidence. This is another quote from the donut bean owner in Thembisa. He's also a participant in our project, Thabang Khololo. He says that to grow today, you have to meet customers where they are, and that is on their phone and their cards. So when he started, he did not have a POS device, but because of the support from the project and the demand from the people that have attended the awareness training, the awareness as well as the trainings, the demand for digital payments arose, and Thabang then got a POS device. So this is what the project, these are the real gains of the project. The fifth intervention being digitizing basic transport payments. Here the rationale is that if people are going to withdraw cash in order for them to commute, they might as well use that cash for buying bananas, for making that little grocery. So this intervention came as a need to minimize cash in the communities, and because this is one sector that is cash heavy, that's where we thought our efforts will be best placed in resolving for this particular intervention. The objective is to digitize taxi payments and test the feasibility of digital payment solution in the minibus taxi sector while generating lessons for broader scale-up. What we have done is we defined requirements for different operating models, such as the scholar transport, long distance, as well as short distance. We have had extensive engagements with relevant stakeholders, such as local taxi associations, to understand their needs, their operating models, and what solution will be most ideal to these associations, because without their support, really, any solution will not be sustainable. We've also engaged with Pay Inc. and some FSPs on how to effectively identify practical and sustainable approaches for digitizing taxi payments. We are also monitoring adoption of digital payments that are currently in the scholar transport sector. Because of the relationship that we have with the scholar transport owners, with them being part of the onboarded participants for this program, we monitor the adoption of digital payments within that sector, because existing solution can work for this in particular. What we have observed is that there are sectors of the industry that can benefit from using existing solutions. I've mentioned the scholar transport. Digitizing local or short distance taxi payments is inherently more complex and will require interoperable solutions that can accommodate the diverse operating model within the taxi sector while advancing the broader digital payments ecosystem. So we ideally do not like to see a closed loop system being deployed to solve for short distance taxi payments. Any solution that we need to come up with should be interoperable and accommodate the diverse operating models. And this is where I lose my hair most of the time. Key lessons here is that the implementation highlighted complexity of local short distance taxi sector, underscoring the need for interoperable payment solutions that support diverse operating models. And then through doing that, we'll be advancing a more inclusive and integrated digital payments ecosystem. The last intervention is regulatory workstream. So when we implement some of these interventions, we note and document regulatory gaps and engage with relevant policymakers to address these gaps. So far we have documented implementation barriers relating to costs, as well as the recourse mechanism for non-bank payment providers. We have engaged with regulators to see how we can address some of these regulatory gaps. The work there is still ongoing. And we are conducting a cost assessment to understand particularly the surcharge that is added by the MSMEs in these communities. Several implementation challenges extend beyond technology. That is one lesson that we have learned, and that policy and regulation have an important enabling role to play when it comes to the adoption of digital payments. And generally, implementation generates valuable evidence for future regulatory reforms. A key lesson here is a supportive regulatory environment is very critical in enabling innovation, interoperability, as well as sustainable adoption of digital financial services. This is another quote from Mr. Cliff Mashishimane from Cliff Cafe in Hammanskraal. He says that they know that while no system is perfect, these digital tools are reliable and transparent. And if we keep championing the adoption of the latest innovation in our communities, more of our small town businesses can leap into the future. So Mr. Mashishimane is one of the participants who have supported the project since inception and continues to do so, and still continues to champion for digital financial services within his community. Reflections holistically from a year of implementation look like this. Community trust remains fundamental. Digital capability drives adoption. So we need to push on literacy, we need to push on awareness in order to see the desired results, and not to make light of the local partnerships that we need to build, and so that we can accelerate implementation. So these will be the community leaders in these communities to partner with them to hold hands in making sure that this project becomes a success. The last reflection is that implementation evidence should shape future policies. Ms. Nsweki Mjali, the owner of Awesome Cakes, Thembisa, says that the transition has significantly improved our operations. Payments are faster, more secure, and much easier to manage. So it becomes easier to run a project like this with a community like this who support, who understand, and who sees the vision, and who trust that we have their best interest in heart. So this is one of the success stories that we have in this project. I will be moving on to the second part of the presentation that talks about the data. It's going to be a short presentation from the panels that we have in these communities. I'll start with the enterprise panel. This is the overview of the panel. So in Hammanskraal, we have 31 panel members. In Thembisa, we have 30. And in terms of gender split, it's pretty much 50-50. So that is the overview. Maybe before I go to digital payments, just to provide a little bit of context on the panel. So ideally, we would like to see supply side data from FSPs in order to measure the success of the project. But without that, we thought it would be also prudent for us to establish panels in these community members that we can monitor on a monthly basis, collect data from them on a monthly basis in terms of the adoption and usage of digital payments. We have tried to make the panels as representative of the community as possible, but because it's such a small sample, there will be some discrepancies, and those are things that we take back to the drawing board and refine as time goes by. But talking about availability of digital payments, this is what I mentioned earlier. After the implementation of the literacy training and the awareness campaign, which ended around August, that's where we were in terms of the number of enterprises in Hammanskraal that had POS devices. And you will see from January there, we started then taking note of all the other digital payments that were available. So not only card payments, the lighter one at the top indicates your PayShap, your EFT, mobile money, and the likes when enterprises accept those other types of digital payments. So in terms of the FinScope, Lesego did mention that we take learnings from the FinScope to design a project. So the FinScope showed that 28% of MSMEs have a POS device. So translated that to the sample size that we have, it will mean that 68, the baseline will be at 68 of enterprises within Hammanskraal in terms of what the FinScope tells us will have POS devices. So we already started on 72. And when you look at where we are currently, it's at around 80. So it shows that when you do deploy these interventions, there will be an increase in terms of the willingness to accept digital payments. Looking at the composition of digital payments received from March to May, this is within the panels. For both Hammanskraal and Thembisa, you will see that Hammanskraal enterprises receive mostly card payments, while Thembisa enterprises get more EFTs. This shows, again, the contrast between the two townships. But what it shows is the dominance of card and as well as EFT, followed by PayShap, cash send, as well as mobile money. It could be because of the influence within a given panel that you will see that they have a preference to either EFT or cards. But what I do know is that in Thembisa, because of the network issues, it takes longer for transactions to be complete on a POS device, and hence you will see the increase there or the preference of EFTs in Thembisa. This is the overview for the consumer panel. So we have around 44 members from Hammanskraal in the panels and 39 in Thembisa, and that is the gender split, the employment status, the social grant status. In terms of the preference or the preference of how they would like to pay, in Hammanskraal they do have a preference to card, which is which correlates what the enterprise panel says, and you will see the EFT in Thembisa there is high, debit orders fairly the same. Then you will see prevalence or more transactions in terms of cash and e-wallet, as well as mobile money, because these are person-to-person payments rather than person-to-business payments. Hence, you will see that a lot more transactions there. I wanted to include this slide because it gave a very interesting story when I looked at it. The yellow shows the willingness to make payments in the panel, in consumer panels, and the blue line shows the actual digital payments made. So the yellow one shows at least one person made a transaction, and the bottom one shows the percentage of the share of digital payments in a panel. So 46% transactions were digital in March, 36% in April, and so on. But what we need to talk about is the gap between the willingness to pay and the actual payments. We don't need to go recruit new people to come and do payments because we already have high numbers. We can just leverage on the numbers that we have to make sure that those individuals that are willing to pay conduct more than just one digital transaction in a given month. And you will see that the FinScope MSME 2024 shows that 71% of enterprises receive digital payments from their clients. So this is the willingness, at least one transaction, 71% of MSME at least receive one digital transactions from their clients, and we are sitting at an average of 70, therefore, also which correlates the FinScope, and 89% of those customers prefer paying in cash. And that is in contrast with what we have here, which is 46, 36, as well as 44, which pay in digital payments. Lastly, I would like to talk about what is next. I've already mentioned the cost dynamics study, understanding those dynamics with a view to mitigate them where possible. We need to look at convincing enterprises of the value of digital payments over cash. Simply using digital payments is not sufficient. They must be tangible advantages, and these advantages is the space for FSPs to train the POS acquirer of the use and benefits of value-added services. Strengthen collaboration with local and regional tax associations to identify implementation challenges, to build stakeholder buy-in, and to support the phased adoption of digital payments solution across different tax and operating models. We will continue community-led awareness and exposure to curricular partnering with the likes of FSCA that Mark has mentioned, because they are supporters of the project, and see where else can we leverage partnerships in order for us to employ or to deploy rather the literacy curricula and embed it in other existing initiatives. Using the digital footprint being generated by digital payments for beneficial use. So as we have stated earlier, that digital payments is an entry point to building a digital ecosystem, but we need to leverage on those generated digital payments, especially when we want the enterprises and the consumers to have access to finance and exposure to appropriate insurance products, a reality on an equitable basis. We're looking at improving the relevance of access to as well as use of e-commerce in townships. And what I want to drive, if you take anything from this webinar, is that greater involvement of all FSPs and other stakeholders in solution design and community involvement to unlock the power of the industry is very critical. Thank you so much for giving me your ear this morning.
Thank you, Karabo. We tried to compress 3 years of work into slides. We thought we would be in time and try to provide it within 30 minutes. It's always hard, which means I'm going to be in trouble with Yayeri, the moderator for the next discussion, where they will be looking at the role of financial service providers, the regulators, in driving what we're trying to drive in the Community Digitalisation program. Yayeri is one of the parts, so she represents SECO. She is a specialist, a private sector development and economic policy specialist with over a decade of experience supporting economic development and policy reforms across sub-Saharan Africa. She leads the private sector development portfolio at the Embassy of Switzerland in South Africa under the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, famously known as SECO, where she oversees programs focused on financial sector development, digital financial infrastructure, MSME finance, and investment climate reforms. She works closely with governments, financial regulators, development partners, academia, and private sector to advance financial inclusion, strengthen financial systems, and promote private sector-led sustainable economic growth. Yayeri, over to you and your panel. You can steal some of my wrap-up time. I'll try wrap up in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lesego. How much time are you giving me?
30 minutes.
Okay. Thank you once again, and good day, everyone. My task is a bit difficult today. I will be moderating today's panel, and we will be looking at the role of financial service providers and regulators in driving community-led digital payments adoption. Thank you to Mark as well for the intro, and to Karabo as well for the presentation. I think a lot of what Karabo mentioned, we will see in the discussion as we go along. So when we talk about digital payments, we're not really talking about replacing cash with either a phone or a QR code or a card. We're really talking about unlocking opportunities for millions of underserved communities. So the communities that we work in this project, most times the first step in them participating in the formal economy is through digital payments. And as such, this creates a financial footprint, which then enables them to unlock access to things like savings, your credit, your insurance, and other services. You're also looking at how digital payments then are able to build transaction histories, and you're looking at your access to working capital for MSMEs, and now they're also able to participate in e-commerce and connect to the broader local and regional markets. And I think we see this as well with the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, where they're looking at strengthening digital payments to not only facilitate trade, but you're also looking at facilitating remittances. So this is why then governments in the global south, including South Africa, have made digital payments a cornerstone of their financial inclusion strategies. We've seen how we're moving towards digitizing social grants and wages and supporting interoperable payments. And the goal of this then is to reduce the cost of financial services. And I think Karabo highlighted some of the costs that are incurred by these underserved communities. You're also looking at increasing economic participation, and as such, you're then building inclusive and resilient economies. But the challenges that are faced by these communities are still very large, right? You're still looking at affordability issues. You're still looking at connectivity issues. You're still looking at acceptance issues. And one of the things that Karabo mentioned is your digital literacy. And as such, addressing these requires payment solutions then that are not only technologically advanced, but also affordable, interoperable, and designed around the realities then of everyday users. So today's discussion won't be about technology, but we're really going to look at how we build a payments ecosystem that enables individuals and businesses to meaningfully participate in the digital economy. With that, I would like to introduce our panel. We have Sipati Nikondela, who's a director at the National Treasury. She's responsible for financial sector development, and she works on financial sector policy and regulatory matters relating to market conduct and financial inclusion. In this role, she has overseen the development of the draft National Consumer Financial Education Policy, and I'm looking forward to her sharing a bit more on the digital and financial literacy. She also serves as the chairperson of the National Consumer Financial Education Committee. And under her leadership, the committee has driven initiatives, including Money Smart Week South Africa, to promote financial capability and consumer awareness. Welcome, Sipati. We also have Mutlatsi Mkalala, I hope I'm pronouncing it well, who is a highly accomplished banking executive with 19 years experience at Standard Bank. He brings deep expertise in strategy, consumer value proposition design, product management, business transformation, and large-scale commercial leadership. He's currently the head of new markets, and he's responsible for building and scaling Standard Bank's capability to capture the 2.3 trillion, I hope I have this number right, 2.3 trillion Rand informal economy opportunity, and as such positioning Standard Bank for long-term growth in one of South Africa's most significant emerging markets. Welcome, Mutlatsi. And then lastly, we've got Roelof. I apologize in advance, Roelof. I'm not sure how to pronounce your surname. I'll go with Goosen. So Roelof is an independent financial inclusion and digital payments expert with more than 4 decades of experience spanning financial services, public policy, and financial inclusion. He advises governments, development partners, and financial sector stakeholders on the design, implementation of inclusive digital financial ecosystems with a particular focus on digital payments, financial inclusion measurement, and policy development. Welcome, Roelof.
Thank you.
I think to kick us off, we are all aware of the interesting paradox that South Africa's digital landscape presents. And while digital transactions continue to grow rapidly in the formal economy, cash still remains dominant in townships and in the informal sector. If you look at the Reserve Bank's digital payments roadmap, it highlights that 95% of MSME customers still pay with cash. About 74% of MSME employees are paid in cash, and only 35% of township businesses actively use digital payment channels. And I think this speaks to what Karabo mentioned around the willingness and the actual digital payments gap that we have seen in the Thembisa and Hammanskraal pilot sites. So I think to kick us off, I will start with you, Roelof. So with this backdrop, it then raises an important question that how come meaningful usage of digital payments continues to lag in some of these communities?
Thank you for the question. And as most of these complex situations require, it's an understanding and an appreciation of the various elements that are at play. So at a simple level, it's to say that you should have the ability to do digital payments, and that is addressed to some extent by the fact that the majority of economically active South Africans have a bank account. The fact that it doesn't translate into usage, as I've pointed out both in what you've said and what Karabo mentioned earlier, has to do with the availability of points of transaction. That's the one element. That is increasing over time, but it's still not where it should be. Trust element, and the trust is not just I trust the person that I'm dealing with. I also trust the instrument. I trust the system that sits behind that and that has the ability to deal with any queries that I have. So trust plays a major role. And I think the third element is that I will mention, there are many others, but the third one that I'll mention is you require to drive the use of both digital payments, digital financial service in general, the involvement of the community at large. And the community, and it has to be led by the community, will be seen to be led by the community. So the involvement of communities themselves, and Karabo also referenced that, is critical. as is the involvement of the enterprise, both banks, fintech-based service providers, civil organizations in the community to drive it forward. It has to be seen as a general support for and underwriting, if you will, the use of digital payments and digital financial services. So we have a way to go. It's a question of, you can't just provide stores of value. You can't just provide points of service and hope that things will carry on. You require this ecosystem-based approach, or the systemic approach, if you will. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Roelof. And I think most of the points you're highlighting did appear in Karabo's presentation. But whilst we're talking about an ecosystem, I think let's move on to an enabling environment. And this is where then you have your national treasury coming in to provide your policies, right? Because this then becomes fundamental in expanding your digital payments, particularly in underserved communities where affordability, interoperability, consumer protection, and innovation need to work together. So I'll move to you, Sipati. And I think the question to you then is, South Africa has invested significantly in payments modernization and innovation, and in providing a framework, an enabling environment for digital payments. How have the policy developments and ecosystem interventions facilitated digital payments in underserved community?
Okay, thank you very much, Yareri, and thank you to the FMT and Mobank team for having us. And I'd just like to commend the team. Let me just start by commending the team for this particular project, because I think from our side as policymakers, regulators, this is an important and especially important intervention, because it helps us to understand what is happening at the community level, so that even the interventions that we then come up with are relevant to what is happening on the ground, and for us to be able to address those issues. So just to note, I think Thabang Kgololo's what you call it, his quote there, the quote that was used. So to grow today, you have to meet the customers where they are, and we're hoping that with these type of interventions, as the policymakers and regulators will be able to meet our stakeholders, be it the customers or the providers, where they are, and that the policies that we come up with are then able to address those. So to your question, Yayeri, I'm going to locate this payments modernization within the broader financial inclusion and the digital transformation agenda. As we do know that the financial inclusion has set out some key policy priorities, which will then, I think we'll see how they'll be implemented with the forthcoming National Financial Inclusion Strategy. But I think what is important here is to ensure that digital payments will be an important part of that implementation, because then they can support economic participation, strengthen livelihoods, and particularly by making it easier for the small businesses to make payments, receive payments, manage their cash flows, and also participate in the wider markets. So just from a payments ecosystem modernization program, that one addresses the payment system conditions that need to support that impact that will come from the financial inclusion policy being implemented. And this includes the modern and interoperable infrastructure, the faster and lower payments that, such as PayShap, that Karabo spoke to, and the broader participation by banks and appropriately regulated payment services providers. And I think the availability of this infrastructure or service is only the first step. I think what is also important is to ensure that these developments are sustainable in the everyday lives of the individuals as well as the enterprises that are using these systems. And just also to one other aspect that I would like to bring through with regards to how government is planning on further implementing this, is that the PEM project is a critical project under the government's digital transformation roadmap, which is aiming to ensure that it addresses fragmentation across the government systems, promoting interoperability, reducing duplication, and also just ensuring that the consumers themselves are able to interact with government, be it through the payment system, government to person payments, person to government payments, and that is very important. So what is also just important to note is because payments do not operate in isolation, they also increasingly connect with government services, identity, data exchange, and business processes and the wider economy as a whole. So the potential impact is very, very significant. And I think the more effective use of digital payments is going to be very, very critical in how we ensure that these digital payments remain affordable and work for low value transactions within these communities that we are talking about, as well as in informal economies. So we'll also just need to ensure that we have reliable mobile connectivity to ensure that data is accessible and so on. So another important issue is just to ensure that merchants are also able to accept these payments, digital payments. Karabo spoke about the trust and consumer protections, which are also just equally as important. So let me leave it there, Yayeri. But I think what is important is just to ensure that the infrastructure and the market conditions we need for a more inclusive digital payments environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sipati. And I think between yourself and Roelof, there are common themes that have come out in your inputs to this. And the first one being the ecosystem and the infrastructure that is necessary to facilitate digital payments. The second one being interoperability. The third one being affordability, and the last one being sustainability. And I think based on the policy and regulatory developments in the country, we are making efforts, or making strides rather, towards having a framework that creates an enabling environment for your financial service providers then to innovate and come in with products for these underserved communities. This then leads me to the financial service providers themselves. So these are the people that develop the products for these communities. And I'll direct this one to Mutlatsi. For many years, right, and I'm not knocking banks here, but for many years, legacy banking systems have made it difficult to provide financial services for low-income customers, and as such, these systems have been exclusionary. But what we're seeing now is that the landscape is changing quite significantly. And if many of you on the platform recall, We had early innovators over a decade ago, like your SnapScan and your Zapper, which essentially helped to introduce digital merchant payments in South Africa. And today, obviously, we have so many more. These solutions are also joined by banks and other fintechs and other mobile payment providers who are offering increasingly affordable and accessible solutions. So from your vantage point, Muhlati, how has the rollout of digital payment solutions in South Africa's townships and rural communities unfolded on the ground? And what trends have you seen from an adoption and a consumer behavior perspective?
Thank you so much, Ayeri. Thanks for having me. And thanks to the FinMark Trust people teams as well for including us in the discussion, but also in the study. So yeah, thanks. And I think when you look in the past where we're coming from, I think firstly we must also look at the improvement or the progress that has been made from a financial inclusion point of view. If you think about where we were 10 years ago to where we are today, I mean, where you've got over 80% of our population being banked today or participating in from a financial institution one way or another. So that has been quite a significant sort of a growth. But over time, to the point that you're making as well, it has not been enough because a lot is still lacking in sort of the products or services that are being delivered in the let's call it township economy or within the townships. So what we've seen as well, we've seen other players with the growth of Spaza Shop as an example, which has helped in driving the culture of swiping, let me call it that way, where people are becoming comfortable in using their cards to make payments. But at the same time, that has also provided some challenges. If you also, we go back to what Karabo was sharing, which is quite prevalent, is the fact that the Spaza Shop owners, as an example, would like to pass the cost of the POS machine to the client. And as a result, they will then add a surcharge. So that then becomes discouraging to the person who wants to do the digital payment, because you cannot accept sort of payments of lower value. But also then becomes a belief. It becomes a belief to the consumer that actually that's the practice and that's what it's done by, let's say, financial institutions, that is part of the pricing, but it's not the case. So that in itself is a challenge on its own. The second piece is that the context in which the consumer is operating, and also the micro enterprise operating, is largely not understood, but also not solved for from a banking system. So for a long time, our banking system is more on people who are earning formally, in terms of that's how we build the system. So you're looking for people with pay slips. So you don't understand people who are dealing in cash or who are earning in cash. So context is important, because if I think about the taxi industry, for example, so the way they would operate is that as a driver, I drive for an owner, and the owner will, ask me to give him a certain amount of money every day, and how he pays me is on the surplus that I make. So which means as a driver, I am reliant on cash for me to earn my keep. So as a result, I would also encourage people to pay. So there's no incentive for me to actually get people to pay digitally, because my payment is reliant on the fact that I've got cash in the system. So that in itself, which then suggests that consumers would then go withdraw cash and also pay for their taxes. The other piece that we've seen as well, which is a challenge, it's been quite a big challenge for financial institutions, is fitting the reality of the consumers on the ground. So what do I mean about that? One of the things that we've seen where people are using their accounts as mailboxes, where salary comes in and then I withdraw all of it. And in most instances, when we go and talk to clients, you find that actually this is part of financial management. So what they would then do is that I can control cash much better than I would control swiping. So if I would then go and I go to make groceries, I've got an envelope that I'll put 1,000 rands. That's my 1,000 rands for groceries, so I can control it. So now the challenge is that how do you then solve and build solutions that can live within the reality or fit the reality of the communities, and that's what we see as a challenge. And then lastly, maybe from a micro enterprise person as well, where you find that the use of cash or solutions that are being built do not give the same benefit as cash. So i.e., if I've got a POS machine and I'm encouraging customers to swipe, the challenge I have is that settlement is not instantaneous. It's not real time. So which means settlement is on the following day. That impacts my ability to run my business, because with cash, I have cash and I can deal with cash now when I need to go and buy stock. So all of these are design challenges that we have to consider when we do looking into how we solve challenges in this market, and obviously making sure that there is enough incentive for people to adopt a different way of doing things, i.e. in the case of the micro enterprise, the incentive could be the fact that we now have a digital footprint. You can be seen. We can understand that you're operating, you're making money, and therefore when you need some assistance with cash flows, you can be able to get that. So at the moment, cash is not seen, but that does not necessarily mean that cash is an issue. Cash is not an issue. It's in how we design to see alternative data that exist to make those decisions.
Great, thank you, Motlati. I think you've raised some critical points here around fitting the realities of consumers on the ground, and it also just makes me wonder then, if you zoom out of South Africa a little bit, right, and have a look at how other countries in the global South have successfully implemented these digital payments. A lot of them were pegged on regulatory achievements before they became technology ones. So if you look at India's unified payments interface, that has enabled the population to have a credit history, right? If you look at Brazil's PIX, that has enabled 70 million Brazilians into the formal economy for the first time. There are certainly lessons that we can take from there that could be introduced in the country. And I think this is my question for you, Roelof. How then do we take lessons from international experiences and bring them into our landscape?
Yeah, thank you for that, and my apologies. We don't really have enough time to go into too much, so I'm just going to highlight a few issues, and most of them have already been raised. The one is that when you look at the service proposition, not only from an FSP perspective, but in general, what do you have to do? And the first thing that one has is country context. You can learn a lot from India in terms of the Indian stack and the UPI and the way they've gone about it. But what is the context for South Africa? So you have to start with the South African reality and then take from what happens in India and apply that. So it needs to be a selective process. The same with Brazil. I'll just very briefly. Spectacular success with the interoperable mobile platform that you referred to. It was based on, and is still being based on, one of the most dysfunctional card processing systems in the world, where it takes up to 30 days to get settlement. So what do you get from that? Be bold in what you do and make sure it works. Some of the other lessons that one can learn from, particularly from places like the Philippines, like Mexico, is a coordinated approach that takes into account the totality of the digital financial system. So it's a systemic approach, and it's also coordinated. It doesn't really matter who leads it, but it has to take into account all the major players and ensure that there is a coordinated effort to address issues, and not just one, be that an FSP or be that a central bank that does something. So it needs to be a coordinated approach. At the same time, back to the point that Mark raised, is although you design for societal impact and maximizing that, the implementation has to be quite specific to start with, that you address particular, what he referred to as use cases, particular instances of where it will make maximum impact. So design for total impact, implement to achieve that as soon as possible. The other one that I'm going to mention is, we talk about user-focused and user-centric, and quite a few countries have done that. It only works if you take the systemic approach. So you need to start with the user, and that's what it's done, but you need to take everything into account, all the other participants, and design for that, which is what India kind of got right, which is what Brazil got right with the PICs, which to some extent the Philippines also got right. Some of the earlier attempts at launching mobile money, and goes back quite a few decades, failed miserably, not because of technology, not because it didn't meet a need, because it wasn't the totality into which you implement those solutions was not properly taken into account. And you understand that those were the first attempts to do that. Peru's BIM mobile platform was one of those examples. But I think I'm going to stick with that one. A systemic approach, user focus in the totality, but in the country context. That could be quite helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Roelof. I have a minute left, and Lisa, I'm going to ask for maybe 2 or 3 more minutes just to wrap up.
That's fine, Yayeri.
Thank you. I think in learning from other markets, what you mentioned, Roelof, is really important around designing for the user, right? And having the solutions reflect South Africa's realities. And I think Mutlatsi articulated this quite well in highlighting that there's a, for lack of a better word, a culture change that needs to happen, right? For example, when it comes to using POS machines in the township, right? The mind shift has to be understanding, one, how to use the machine, but also you're looking at your financial management training, which then leads to the last question that I will throw at Seipati and Mutlatsi. That having highlighted all of these challenges in the township, so over and above your financial and digital literacy, what other literacy measures need to be in place to facilitate the adoption of digital payments in these communities? Just 1 minute. I'll start with you, Seipati, and then Mutlatsi, 1 minute each if possible.
Okay, I think the involvement, which is something that is being done here in with the community digitalization project, is that community organizations have an important role to play because they understand how the people and the enterprises transact, and where trust sits locally and what practical difficulties users are experiencing. So this support can then help to ensure that interventions are designed with the communities in mind. But also just in terms of something that Motlatsi mentioned regarding, merchants maybe not accepting or thinking about that the money is only going to be in the accounts clear by the following day. We now have PaySharp. What are we doing in terms of, educating around these products that are being introduced to ensure that we displace cash and we ensure that we have products that are as close to using cash as we possibly can. So as policymakers and regulators, these are interventions that are being put in place, and we then need to ensure that implementation, where there are implementation issues and concerns, then we can keep on, building from that. But we also just need to work with the industry and sector to ensure that those interventions are, the communities are made aware of them. So yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sipati. Motlatsi?
Thank you, and thanks to Sipati. I think the community trust element is quite an important piece, but also a simple thing as interventions should be in the language of the community, as an example. It's such a simple concept, but it's the most powerful concept because it says that we understand the context of the community, and you can have these interventions in a way that's understood, and the best way to do it in line with Thabang Kgololo's view, that if you are with the community, it means that you will do things the way they would actually consume them. Even in the intervention from a financial literacy, that should be the case. And also obviously utilizing the community and the trust that sits in the community. I think if we do that, we'll probably be like 10 steps ahead than what we have today.
Thank you, Motlatsi. I think with that, I would like to close the panel and thank all the panelists for joining me in this brief discussion. I wish we were given a bit more time, but I think what's pretty clear around this conversation is that we have started the work here in South Africa with the support of FinMark Trust and all the stakeholders that are involved in the project, the World Bank, the South African Reserve Bank, and the respective cities. I think it's the city of Tshwane and the city of Ekurhuleni. What's pretty clear is that with these pilots, we are hoping to at least get to a point where digital payments, are adopted, and to Karabo's presentation around the willingness versus the actual usage of these digital payment platforms, we still have a bit of work to do. And I think with the last inputs from Sipati and Motlatsi, I think we should be able to get somewhere. And from a regulatory perspective, I think there's a lot that we're seeing coming out of the financial inclusion strategy, coming out of the payments ecosystem modernization work, coming out of the country's digital transformation agenda, right? Because at the end of the day, we're hoping to get to a point where all the people that conduct digital payments, they're somewhat linked to, other government databases. I know from a tax implication and all of that, that is a different conversation that we would need to have with the taxman. But at least once you have now the digital footprint, it speaks to the goals then that we want to achieve with this work, which is affordability, interoperable, and sustainable solutions. And with that, I'd like to thank all my panelists and thank you everyone for your attention. I will now hand back over to you, Lesego. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yayeri, and you made my work so easy. I was supposed to wrap up, but I think you've done that for us by pointing out the key things that are required in order for us to be able to do what we do. But I think at the core of this particular webinar is understanding that FinMark Trust, the World Bank, South African Reserve Bank, and SECO will not be able to do or achieve the impact that is desired from the program without supply side support. It's important that we partner with the private sector, financial service providers. We urge you to partner with us so that we're able to take this work forward. We're not going to be able to come up and say this is what scale up looks like unless we've partnered. And I think we appreciate efforts from the likes of Standard Bank, represented by Motlatsi, in supporting a program like this and understanding that for you to be able to serve these markets, you need to understand them and you need to understand their needs and you need to design with them. And this program provides you an opportunity to do exactly that. We didn't design it with the intention that we're going to force down any interventions. The interventions that were created were co-created with the regulators, with community members. We sat in Thembisa and did that. And we want to continue to do that. We want to continue to create solutions for communities, but hand in hand with the regulators, with the private sector, with those that serve those communities. Because when you understand who you're serving, it makes it easier for you to then serve them adequately and appropriately. To the World Bank, South African Reserve Bank, and SECO, thank you for making this possible for FinMark Trust to implement. To the partners that have decided to join us and facilitate the work that we're doing, thank you. To the city of Tshwane and the city of Ekurhuleni, thank you. But most importantly, to Karabo and her team that are in the field and have to navigate different things on a day-to-day basis. We wouldn't be able to learn any of these things if you were not doing the work that we're doing, together with the support that you receive from Roelof on an ongoing basis. Thank you. With that said, I would like to thank each and every person that decided to join this webinar. And I want you to go off. I'm going to wish you a good rest of the week. But while you do that, I want you to think about the program and what you can do to support its implementation. We are only a market facilitator that's supported by funders, as well as people from that have a global perspective on what we need to do. But we're not going to be able to end regulators and policymakers, but we can't do this without you. So think about what should you be contributing and how would you like to partner with us so that we take this work forward. We're also wanting to invite you from a FinMark Trust perspective. I think when I started, I mentioned that we didn't do this work from nothing. We used the FinScope consumer surveys and MSME surveys to inform what we are doing. On the 30th of July, we will be hosting a soft launch of our results, our FinScope consumer survey launch for 2025. And we look forward to you joining us once more. The session will be held virtually from 10 to 11. If you haven't received an invitation, please do reach out to us so that we can send you an invitation. But we look forward to engaging with you. And for the Community Digitalisation Program, it's a series of webinars that we have decided to have. And as we build learnings, once again, you will get an invitation from us so that we can share what we're finding, but also to see how we can collaborate with you. With that said, thank you, everyone. And thank you for taking 11 minutes of your time that you had not budgeted for and for giving it to us. Thank you.